What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Go Talk with Marcus, powered by products fueled by Goat Fuel. Today, we are talking all things Colts with one half of the Riding the Bench podcast. Justin, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
What's up, man? Thank you so much for having me, and I love being part of an all Colts episode. This is right down my alley, brother.
Appreciate you for coming on the show. For those of you guys that are watching and listening, this is episode 16 now of the 32 episode series where we're doing all NFL, all 32 teams, which means we were halfway done.
Solid.
In a long journey, we've got 16 down, 16 more to go. If you've missed any of the other 15 episodes, please head over to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio to check them out, and also tune in for the next 16 that are going to follow this one. Let's jump right into it. The Indianapolis Colts, after looking like one of the best teams in the NFL last season, their season came to a heartbreaking conclusion with a loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville. But the story of the Colts season last season was one Jonathan Taylor, who had a really, really, really good season last season and got him in some MVP discussions towards the season's back stretch. After last season, is Jonathan Taylor the best running back in football?
You know, I'm glad that you mentioned that MVP bid that he had going on there. I'm telling you, as a Colts fan, I don't think I'm alone. For all of us, 2021 was the year that Jonathan Taylor won the MVP. I don't even know who actually won it. I just know it's
Aaron Rodgers did.
Good for him, in my opinion. And again, I will remember that as a Jonathan Taylor MVP season. And the question is he the best running back in football? I'd have to say he is. You know, it's a position that I feel like, especially now, some of the guys who are the best in the league, a lot of them kind of are at that crossroads in their career where they have the injuries coming in, right? Sure. And it's a position that's so often based on how much mileage you have, right? So sure. I think JT, one, was the best in the league last year, and two, of all the guys that would be in the discussion with him, has the least amount of mileage. I mean, this is a guy that had 337 carries, right? Mm-hmm. And people were saying he needed to get the ball more. In fact, I do have my Run the Damn Ball sweatshirt on right now. So, yeah, I mean, there's only three guys off the top of my head, that have had that many carries in the past 10 years. You're talking DeMarco Murray in the 1 year with the Cowboys, AP in his MVP season, and obviously Derrick Henry. They'll give him 500 carries till the wheels fall off. So for me, I'm going to say JT has to be the best running back in the league, and I say that completely unbiasedly, of course.
Well, as a Colts fan, it's hard to gauge how much of that is bias and how much it's valid. I mean, I feel the same way about Jonathan Taylor as I do Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp had a fantastic season last season, but I don't think Cooper Kupp is the best back in football or the best wide receiver in football. I feel the same way about Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor had a hell of a season last season. I don't think Jonathan Taylor was the best back in football. I've got my top 15 running backs in the NFL right now, and he's third on my list. I still think Derrick Henry is the best back in football. And I think that Nick Chubb is also better than Jonathan Taylor. Those are only two guys I would take ahead of Jonathan Taylor at this point. But it's close. It's not one of those things where if you say that Jonathan Taylor is the best running back in football, that it's like a crazy thing to say, because he had one hell of a season last season. He had 1,800 yards. He had 18 touchdowns. He had 40 receptions. I think he had 5 receiving touchdowns as well last season. He played really, really, really good football. Sure. And what's the craziest about Jonathan Taylor's season last season is that was only his second season in the NFL, but it was his first full season. Obviously, when he got drafted 2 years ago, he missed all of that season due to injury, and that's when we kind of saw Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines play really good ball for your Indianapolis Colts. But Jonathan Taylor burst onto the scene and reminded everybody just exactly who he is and why the Colts drafted him 2 years ago. I love JT. It's going to be unfortunate because if you're not picking high in the draft order in your fantasy football leagues, you're not going to get JT because he's going to be one of the first guys gone. But, I mean, your point about injury is a valid one, right? I think that when you look at some other guys that may have been on the conversation for best back in the league over the past couple of years, like a Dalvin Cook or an Alvin Kamara or Christian McCaffrey, even Ezekiel Elliott, all those guys have been dealing with a lot of injuries the past couple of seasons. That's really brought down their stock. But Derrick Henry, I know when Derrick Henry is healthy, there isn't a better running back in football. The one thing I give to Jonathan Taylor that I can't give to Derrick Henry is Jonathan Taylor isn't just a threat in the running game. He's also a threat as a receiver out of the backfield. And that has a lot to do with the system that Indianapolis runs. They enjoy throwing out of the backfield. And that's no shot at Derrick Henry or what's going on in Tennessee. But Derrick Henry is your quintessential bell cow back. Like, he will run on all 4 downs, and we've seen him do some crazy things at the running back position. Jonathan Taylor, though, is fantastic, and it's hard not to like a guy as talented as he is that is a threat as a runner and as a passer coming out the backfield.
Absolutely, and I'm just going to say this, a little bit of a hot take for you on your show here. I think Derrick Henry, if not this season, I think he's about to be cooked, bro. He's one of those guys, to me, I look at his style of play, I look at his size, and then obviously a foot injury being with the way he plays, I don't view as a great thing. He's the type of guy that, in my opinion, when he falls off, it is going to be, I almost feel like I'm like Max Kellerman with the Tom Brady cliff take here, but like literally, like when Henry falls off, he's going to go from being what you say is the best in football. I don't hate the take, by the way. The best to, I'm taking it word for word, to basically a bum, basically completely unusable. I think it's going to happen just because he looks like he's slowed down to me. I'm just going off the eye test. Certainly not against Indianapolis. He always looks good against us. But you know, as a fantasy owner, as my dad being a fantasy owner, I've living with him until recently. I was seeing a lot of Derrick Henry because my dad all of a sudden became a Titans fan. And to me, it looked like he had slowed down at times. The numbers were still there. But again, I think that foot injury is going to be tough for him. Nick Chubb at 2, though, that's blasphemous, in my opinion.
That's fair. I'll take it. I think, we're talking about it. I don't think Nick Chubb gets a lot of love. I mean, when we're just looking at Nick Chubb is the running back. He is RB1 on what I think many would consider the best 1-2 punch in football at the running back position with himself and Kareem Hunt. Nick Chubb's definitely top. I'll be honest. To me, there are a lot of positions in sports, not just in the NFL, but across like the league or across the sport of sports. Like there are some names that are just interchangeable as long as they're in that same range. You know what I mean? Like,
that's fair enough.
You talk about like MJ and LeBron and Kareem, right? But most people would say that it's MJ or LeBron. There are people out there that think Kareem's the GOAT, but that is universally acknowledged as the 3 best guys to ever step foot on a basketball court, right? When you're talking about Josh Allen, Pat Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, we all recognize those 4 guys as being the 5 best quarterbacks in football. The order might be a little bit different. So for me, with Nick Chubb, I think one of the most important components of being the best at your position is consistency over time. And that's what Jonathan Taylor and Cooper Kupp don't have on their side right now. More so Jonathan Taylor than Cooper Kupp. It's not Jonathan Taylor's fault. Like we said, it's only his second season, his first full season. I think Jonathan Taylor will be a consistently great back in the NFL. But Nick Chubb's been doing it for a while. Derrick Henry's been doing it for a while. That's why I have those 2 guys ahead of Jonathan Taylor. But if we're just talking about what we saw last season, undeniably, Jonathan Taylor was the best running back in football last season. He was one of the 5 best players in football last season, up there with Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, T.J. Watt, and Aaron Rodgers, who won MVP last season. Like that is undeniable. He played really, really, really good football, and taking that away from him would absolutely be blasphemous for sure.
All right, I can agree with you there. We can meet in the middle right there. I have no problems with that.
Meeting in the middle, I think, is a good thing. Another place I think we'll meet in the middle is the impact Matt Ryan will have on this wide receiver room in Indianapolis. I'm on record as saying that I think Indianapolis wide receiver room is one of the most underrated and disrespected in football.
Thank you for that.
Bringing in a guy who is Mr. Consistency in Matt Ryan. Last season, Matt Ryan finished with 3,968 yards, I believe. It's the first time since 2010 Matt Ryan hasn't recorded at least 4,000 yards in the regular season. Do you think this wide receiver room improves now under Matt Ryan, given what we saw with him do under Carson Wentz last season and the season before that with Phillip Rivers?
Yeah, well, I think Rivers is tough because of listen, at the end of the day, we're going to get the best version of Michael Pittman this season, right? Absolutely. Paris Campbell is a guy, he can't be trusted. This I understand. But as a Colts fan, I'm still high on him. I think he's the type of guy that if he stays healthy, a lot of the questions about this wide receiver room are going to get put to rest. You have a guy like Alec Pierce coming in, and you have guys like Tony Gonzalez back when he was playing tight end on the Falcons with Matt Ryan. I mean, he's on record saying that Matt Ryan made him a better tight end. So, you know, I love it. And on top of it, it's not just Matt Ryan. People maybe outside of Indianapolis don't know or forget or don't think about it. Reggie Wayne is their wide receivers coach, which I love. The Colts are doing a lot of that with their coaching staff. I love not only having former players, high-level players coaching them, but guys who were Colts, right? Guys who really understand the culture, and being a good Colt means a lot to them. So I think Reggie Wayne and Matt Ryan combined, I really think I agree with you. I think it's an underrated group. but at the same time, they're very, very thin. So while I think they'll be improved from last year, that is health dependent because we're about an injury or two away from putting bums out there, if I'm being honest with you. So
that is true. That is the one thing. I mean, we're talking about, obviously, I think the big one last season, and there's an argument to be made that he hasn't been as good as he was with Andrew Luck, but T.Y. Hilton has missed a large chunk of games the last couple of seasons due to injury, and also he's getting older. But when you look at Michael Pittman, I think is going to have a really good season this season. I think he's going to be like, if I'm just going down the list and talking about who's going to break out at each position, he's at the top of that list because he's got a guy in Matt Ryan who is very consistent, who understands how to play, who he's going to make good decisions. He's going to take care of the football. And Matt Ryan has played with a guy like Michael Pittman before, a smaller wide receiver that's speedy and can run just about every route on the route tree. I don't think there's a route that Michael Pittman can't run. He can give you the five, like he can do every route on the route tree. And he's one of those tenacious wide receivers. He's going to fight for every yard, and he can blow the top off the defense. That is going to be, I think, something that Matt Ryan is going to enjoy because we haven't seen Matt Ryan with a guy that can blow the top off the defense in at least the last 2 years consistently. Anyway, and when you couple that with a guy in the backfield, as Jonathan Taylor, as you mentioned, that can receive out of the backfield, that's just going to make this offense so much more explosive and so much more dynamic. And when you have a guy, Matt Ryan, who is I believe he is top 5 all time, if I'm not mistaken, in comeback drives and game-winning drives in the NFL, that means a lot, too, in a really, really, really tough AFC where you're going to be in a lot of those tight games where you're going to need game-winning or come-from-behind wins. And that was the missing piece, I think, was that you couldn't really rely on Carson Wentz last season to make those big-time throws down the stretch in really tight games. Now you have a guy in Matt Ryan who can do that. Listen, Matt Ryan's not the sexiest quarterback in football. He's far from it. He definitely has a lot fewer games ahead of him than he does behind him, but he's still really reliable. He's in my top 15. I don't think there's a better pickup offensively that the Colts could have made in this offseason as far as getting over that hump to get closer to potentially competing for and winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I mean, the beauty about Matt Ryan, too, is that he commands that respect out of that receiving core, right? There was a lot of reports last year, and reports are reports. I mean, listen, I'm not in on this stuff. But there are a lot of guys, it seems like, weren't vibing with Carson Wentz. It's not exactly the first time we've heard that type of thing in his career. And when you have a guy like Matt Ryan who's played with Tony Gonzalez, Julio Jones, even Roddy White, I mean, he's been playing quarterback at a high level for a very, very, very long time. So these wide receivers are young. They're going to respect him. And I know you said he's not the sexiest quarterback. You know he, by science, has the most symmetrical face in the league, right? That's a fact. You can look that up. I'm pretty sure that's a fact, bro.
I did not.
Yeah. And also 4-0 against the Jaguars as well, which is good for us.
Well, that's important too for a team that has struggled against the Jacksonville Jaguars, especially in Jacksonville the last couple seasons. So we talk about Matt Ryan offensively. There's also another massive pickup defensively, and that's Stephan Gilmore. This is a defense that is anchored by Darius Leonard that has talent on all 3 levels, underrated talent on all 3 levels. And now you're bringing in Stephan Gilmore to bolster up that back 7. Stephan Gilmore or Matt Ryan, who do you think has, or that back 4 rather, who do you think has a bigger impact on the Colts' success this season?
Well, I think it's got to be Matt Ryan just because he's the quarterback. And again, when you're going from a guy like Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan, I think that's a bigger difference on a leadership level. Despite the fact that we needed the talent in the cornerback room, obviously we had Kenny Moore and we had Darius Leonard. So we had leadership on that side of the ball. It was offensively where we really kind of, even though we had an identity in running the ball with Jonathan Taylor, ultimately we were held back by the fact that we really didn't trust our quarterback to lead men. So I think the biggest benefit of this team, surprisingly, is not even going to be the way Matt Ryan plays per se, but instead what he brings to them as a leader offensively and just keeping them on the same page at all times. So I'm going to say Matt Ryan not only has maybe a bigger impact than Stephan Gilmore on the Colts, I think he might arguably, in terms of you look around the league, maybe the biggest impact pickup in the league this year. And again, of course, I say that completely unbiasedly as a Colts fan.
Of course. I think, and I love the pick with Stephan Gilmore, but I think the other thing, too, is when you're talking about Matt Ryan, you're talking about a situation where we always talk about complementary football, and we always try to compare it to offense and defense. But complementary football applies to the running game and the passing game. And when you don't have a guy under center that you can trust, you can't pass the ball effectively and keep the defense on their toes. Now you bring in a guy in Matt Ryan that's going to keep the defense honest. You're not going to just sit back and and just let Matt Ryan do whatever he wants to do, because then you look up at the scoreboard and you're down big, because Matt Ryan is still one of the more surgical quarterbacks in the NFL today. That's massive. The leadership of Stephan Gilmore is just enhancing the leadership that Darius Leonard and guys on the defense already have. This defense, I think, though, is going to be a top 10 defense in the league, and they could push for top 5. When you've got talent on all 3 levels and you're going to have a really good offense, or one of the better offenses in the league, I think you're going to be talking about a lot of situations where you're going to be forcing these opposing football teams to drive the length of the field, because Matt Ryan's not going to turn the ball over, and we're not. Are they going to punt? Yeah. It's not that they're not going to punt.
Is what it is.
It's not going to be. Yeah, it's not going to be as much as you were punting last season. So we're talking about a situation now. We're going to have a rested defense as well, because they're not going to be on the field so much because of turnovers and things like that. All of those things matter. The Colts are going to be the epitome of complementary football. I think this is the most well-balanced team in football right now, because of now the leadership components on both sides and just the improvements. Like, we talk about needs, and one of the most important things in football, in sports in general, but especially in football, is assessing needs, right? And the Indianapolis Colts assessed a need, and they needed a quarterback that they could rely on. He might not be the long-term solution because he's old, but he can buy you some time between until you find that next guy who can take over the reins and be that long-term guy for you. Matt Ryan's going to be really special in Indianapolis. He's going to be behind what I think is the best offensive line in football. Has really good people to throw the ball to. He's got Jonathan Taylor. He's got good coaching, and the defense is really good too. All around, this is really good. But like you said, if I got to pick one guy that's going to have a better impact, it's definitely going to be Matt Ryan, because, as we all know, the quarterback is the most important position on a football field at all times.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, I'm going to completely defer to you on this one, because I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know who the Indianapolis Colts drafted this season.
I wouldn't either. I wouldn't either.
The Indianapolis Colts obviously did draft players, as every team does at this time of year. So how would you, as a fan, grade the Indianapolis Colts draft class this season?
It's hard, because when you don't have a first round pick, it is hard to give a team that A grade, that A+ grade, and then obviously you look around at other teams who did have a first round pick, and you kind of just feel like we lack that top end talent here. But what I love about the draft, and I suppose to give a grade, I'll give a B+, completely unbiasedly. And I just like that we filled needs. This kid Alec Pierce, just the more I watch him, the more I love him. I mean, he's really can do it all. He could run out of the slot. He could run outside. And Reggie Wayne it was a big part in the scouting process, so he co-signed that one as well. This kid Alec Pierce, I really, really, really like. But then again, I loved Paris Campbell out of the draft, and you look at some of the receivers that came out of that draft, for as great as Chris Ballard has been. I mean, you talk about a draft with, who was even in that draft, man? Who was drafted after him? I'm drawing a blank. Point being, is anyone listening, if you go back and look at that draft class with Paris Campbell, which may be 2019, there was a lot of guys, and the Colts whiffed. I mean, Hunter Renfrow, between the second and the fourth round, Hunter Renfrow and Paris Campbell were like the 2 worst receivers drafted. So, and Hunter Renfrow is obviously a big-time player. So, I love Pierce, though, so I'm going to hope that he kind of breaks that mold. Nick Cross, the safety, I like quite a bit. I think he's a little bit raw. He's big time in, it seems at least, big time in run protection, or rather run stopping. I was hoping that he'd get a little more time as a backup. But given that Kari Willis retired, it seems like he's going to be working into our rotation pretty quickly. So we'll see how Nick Cross does. I like the kid. We drafted the offensive tackle. A lot of people had Bernard Ramain, I don't know how to pronounce it, as a first-round talent. We got him in the 3rd, which I love. And one of the least talked about losses a team has endured in recent memory, in my opinion, is when Anthony Costanzo prematurely retired from our left tackle position. We have been trying to figure that out ever since. I mean, you're talking Eric Fisher was a complete disaster. Matt Pryor came in last year and gave some all right work. I want to see how Ramain does in that role, if they want to use him there. And then 2 more guys, actually. Jelani Wood, 6'7" tight end that we drafted between him and Mo Ali Cox. That's massive red zone stuff right there. So I love Jelani Wood's talent. And then Curtis Brooks is a guy that I probably only like because I'm a Colts fan. But he's a 5-year player out of Cincinnati, defensive tackle that they took in the 6th round. Just looking at him, I think he has what it takes to be a rotational guy on the defensive line. So in terms of top-end talent, not sure if it's there, but in terms of guys that are going to make an impact early in their career, and get reps for us, I think there's 4 or 5 of them. So I'm giving that draft a B+. I'm very happy with it personally.
Let's talk about the schedule. You've got 10 games combined between what I think are the 2 worst divisions in football. And that's 6 games against the AFC South, and then you got 4 games into the NFC East. You've got the entire AFC West, and then there's a game in there with Minnesota. You've got Pittsburgh in there and New England. How many wins are your Colts going to rack up this season?
Oh, I hate picking a number. And as you said, it's our division stinks. And then you have the NFC East, which might be even worse. But then you have the AFC West, which I view as the strongest division in football. So that division, each team in that division is just as likely to finish first as they are fourth, other than the Chiefs. They're likely the only team I can't picture finishing in last place there. And the Broncos are starting to grow on me as well, even though this is about the Colts. Mm-hmm. It's tough. I don't want to pick a number for a team that was blowing leads last year and then collapsed at the end of the season. I'll just put it like this. If we did not have somewhere between 10 and 12 wins, considering we were able to come out of last year's mess, 9 and 8, 10 to 12 wins, I would be wildly, wildly disappointed if we did not come out with that. This is the first year in some time that I've had legitimate expectations for this team. So I'm looking at 10 to 12 wins, and I want to trip into the divisional round in a competitive game. At the end of the day, there's only 4 teams that make the championship and 1 team that wins the Super Bowl, right? Everyone else ends their season disappointed. So a lot of people are like, oh, if you didn't make the Super Bowl, it doesn't matter. It's like, right, well, you might as well just stop watching football. You know what I'm saying? At a certain point. I want something to root for, and I think they're going to give it to me. So I'm thinking that they're going to get 10 to 12 wins divisional round. We'll lock that in, and then from there, everything else is great.
I've been doing some deep dive, and I got to say this Colts schedule it grows on me every time I look at it. I gave it one more passing glance, and I haven't deep dive, but I've given it a lot of thought. When you've got 10 games against the 2 worst divisions in football, there's only 2 games on that schedule that give me a cause for concern. That's the game in Jacksonville, because for some reason the Colts can't beat the Jaguars in Jacksonville. That's the game against the Dallas Cowboys. That's because the Cowboys are going to be a tough team to play because they have a really good quarterback in Dak Prescott. The Eagles game, I think, is a toss-up. It could go either way. Who cares about the New York Giants? No one cares about the Washington Commanders. No one cares about the Texans. And the Titans don't have, and this is no disrespect because Treylon Burks, I think, will be okay, but the Titans don't have a wide receiver room. They've just got Derrick Henry. That's not going to be a recipe for success this season. The games that are concerning to me, though, are obviously the 4 games against the AFC West. The game against Pittsburgh, the game against Minnesota, and the game against New England. Those games are like really tough because you've got New England in New England. You have Minnesota in Minnesota. You have Dallas in Dallas. You got Pittsburgh at home, which is cool. But Pittsburgh's, I think, going to be a tough team to play this season, and they always kind of stay consistent and play about the same brand of football all the time. You say
when you have a guy like Mike Tomlin, you know you're always gonna be competitive.
A guy like Mike Tomlin who's never had a losing season ever. It's hard to kind of look at them and kind of just be like, oh, whatever, despite the fact that they may or may not have top of the line quarterback talent. I say all that to say I still think the Colts can steal 2 extra games, which could potentially put the Colts at 13 wins. If we're being realistic, I'd put them around 10, which is right where you're at. I think they run away with the division. I don't think this division is going to be as close as it was last season down the stretch. I think this is the Colts division to lose. Because if you look at the Jaguars and the Texans, they're just not ready yet. And the Titans have gotten worse, and the Colts have gotten better. And it's the same situation in AFC South as it is in the NFC East, right? It's going to be a 2-horse race in the NFC East between the Cowboys and the Eagles. I think the Eagles are going to win it because they got better while the Cowboys got worse. Same thing here. If the Colts got better, the Titans got worse. That's what the Colts have to ride on. And as crazy as it sounds, the game in Jacksonville is the one that concerns me because that seems to always be the Colts' kryptonite. But aside from that, this is going to be a really good football team that will make the playoffs. And depending on the matchup, we could see them in the divisional round of the playoffs this year. It really just all depends on the matchup. It's going to be a tough AFC though. It won't be a cakewalk at all. It's going to be tough.
It's a big time conference, and just I do want to speak to the division just a little bit more because even though it's definitely not the best division, I do think that it doesn't get quite enough credit. Tennessee, another underrated move that happened this offseason. A lot of talk about and I forgot. I was basically reminded when I was doing some offseason research. Even though he's coming off a torn ACL, they did bring in Robert Woods. That guy's no bum. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Robert Woods can still go. And he's very easy to forget about. This I understand. I mean, the beginning of the season is going to be very telling. Colts have been notoriously slow starters, not just with Frank Reich, but even going back. I can't remember the last time we've started a season better than like 2-4. So, actually, I think maybe once we had a 5-2 with Jacoby Brissett of all the people. But we have Houston and we have Jacksonville to start the season before we come home versus Kansas City. So, I mean, if the people that make the schedules were ever trying to hand the Colts a good start, this would be it. I'm also low-key a little bit scared of Jacksonville. And I'm not just talking about just beat the Colts and then go 1-15. I'm talking about like I would not be shocked. I'm not going to die on this hill. I would not be shocked if by the end of the season the Jaguars were competing for this division. And I would not be shocked, and I'll get to why, because every time I say that, people's eyes pop out of their head. And I would not
at the top of this series, the very first episode, the Jaguars have a lot of okay, they pay Christian Kirk all that money, and but like if you look at it, you bring in a former Super Bowl winning head coach in Doug Peterson, who should have never been fired from Philadelphia, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Trevor Lawrence, who I think is going to take that step forward. You shore up your offensive line by bringing in a veteran like Brandon Scherff. You have talent to throw the ball to. You bring in Evan Ingram. Again, does he deserve the money? Who knows? But you paid him and you brought him in, and that's a tight end. The defense, I think, is going to get better. But most importantly, Travis Etienne Jr., who didn't play last season due to injury, is going to play this season. And I think that's going to mean a lot as well when you also have James Robinson as well. The Jaguars could be sneaky. I think if we're being realistic, the Jaguars win 3 or 4 games. But they're a sneaky team that could get a lot of people confused down the stretch. And because of how wide open I think the division could be, I agree with you. It wouldn't be all that shocking to see the Jaguars competing maybe for a spot in the playoffs this season.
Would not be shocked. And we're going to learn a lot about Doug Peterson this year. I mean, this was a guy that, as you said, in my opinion, was completely unjust in getting fired out in Philly. But at the time, obviously hindsight's 2020. We didn't know what the heck happened, So we're going to see, because obviously it was the Carson Wentz situation, full circle, right? Because obviously the Colts just dealt with them. So, I mean, we're going to see if Doug had a hand in that, because if he didn't, and if that's really that Super Bowl winning coach, which I believe he is, I think maybe halfway through the season, we're going to be looking at Trevor Lawrence as the best quarterback in the division. I mean, I remember last year, Trevor's stats were very, very deceiving. I mean, if you watch the Jaguars, that team was a mess. They had no identity. And I remember when we played the Jaguars towards the end of the season, I was just looking and I said, damn, for the first time in a very, very, very long time, I'm saying I wish I had the Jaguars quarterback. And again, Matt Ryan's great. Love Matt Ryan, but Trevor, the sky's the limit right now, and he's only going to get better. And with Doug Peterson, again, I think it's more likely they even win maybe 5 games or 6 games. Like, that's kind of where I view them.
Of course.
But if they end up with, again, the division's not good. So let's say they take it to the Texans, because they're the one team I think has no chance whatsoever.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
And I like Davis Mills, but come on. The Texans have no chance. So let's say the Jaguars take both of those games, right? And now you're talking about just splitting versus the other two, and then who knows who else they could surprise. I mean, again, Doug Peterson, when he was in Philly, loved to use a lot of running backs. They have running back talent that you just stated. Again, I would not be shocked if this is a team that ended up with 10, 11 wins. I mean, it sounds crazy, but, stuff happens every year in the NFL. So the Jaguars are the one team, not just, in the division. Maybe I'm a little more intimate with their talent because I'm in the division as a fan. But I think they're going to surprise a lot of people this year, man. Even if it doesn't reflect in the win total, I don't think they're going to be an easy out. I think they're going to be what Detroit was last year, despite the fact that Detroit finished like 3-14. Yeah. Nonetheless, they were a tough out. I think the Jaguars are going to be the same go for people this year.
I mean, and again, just like the Titans have, just like the Colts have 10 games against the 2 worst divisions of football, the Jaguars do too, right? Exactly. So, not to mention, they've also got a game against the Jets and the Lions and the Ravens. So they've got 2 extra games on their schedule that are toss-up games that you could very easily see them winning, and it's possible. And I talked about it at the top of the series, the very first episode we did doing this NFL offseason series. So you guys should check it out. But I agree with you. Like, if we're being realistic, of course we're talking 4 or 5 wins, high end 6. If we're being realistic, but when you look at how bad these divisions are, how many good games they have, of course the wear and tear over the course of the season, They pose a serious threat as far as being a trap team for a lot of football teams. It's possible. It is possible. And the Jacksonville Jaguars, even though the record doesn't show it, the Jaguars players, because they're young, and this is how it is for all sports, no matter what it is, young players play best at home. The Jaguars have a lot of good teams coming to Jacksonville that could pose a threat as a trap game. Obviously, Indianapolis, they're hosting Denver, they're hosting Las Vegas, they're hosting Baltimore, they're hosting Dallas, they're hosting Tennessee. Those are good football teams. Young players play good at home. They feel inspired. They like putting on a good show for the home crowd. That's just always how it goes in sports. It's possible. I wouldn't bet on it, but it's
neither would I, brother.
I definitely wouldn't bet on it, but it is possible. Well, thank you, man, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to talk all things Colts with you. Please let everybody know at home where they can find you and your content.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having us, or having me, I suppose. The best place, I think, right now, best platform is on Instagram at the Riding the Bench Podcast with a K instead of a C in the word podcast. That's definitely our go-to platform right now. Maybe more coming, but that is the primary place if you want to keep up with us.
Well, again, it was definitely a pleasure to have you on the show. Please, you guys head over to Instagram and follow the Riding the Bench Podcast. They make great stuff, and I love watching all their stuff on Instagram. As for me, you guys know where to find me at GTP Markets on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Go Total Markets on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. A lot of great things coming. As I said, this is episode 16 of 32 of the NFL offseason series. 16 down, 16 more to go. So we're almost there. And by the time we're done here with the NFL season, we'll be ready in a couple of weeks by the time this series is over. So it's always a pleasure to put on shows for you guys. It was a pleasure talking to you, man. So for Justin, one half of the Riding the Bench Podcast, this is Marcus of Go Talk to Marcus signing off. Thank you guys for watching. And as always, you guys enjoy the rest of your lives.